This is Battleground PA, a PennLive podcast discussing the issues that matter to Pennsylvanians and documenting the events in the Keystone State and beyond that could shape how you vote in the 2024 elections.
Well, greetings, everyone. It's great to be with you again. This is Joyce Davis, PennLive's Outreach and Opinion Editor, and this is Battleground PA. Today, we are delighted to have not only our trusted Republican analyst, Jeffrey Lord, who's with us. He's an old hand at this. But we are welcoming a new guest, a new fighter on the battleground, so to speak, and that is former Lieutenant Governor Mark Singel. And Mark, many people know you already if they're a PennLive reader because you're a columnist. You appear every week in our newspaper. So welcome, Lieutenant Governor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. And he will be hailing from the Democratic side of things. But to kind of get us the topic that we want to really get started on, Deborah Rose is going to lead us in that. And Deborah Rose Hinchey is the state director, I believe, with something called All Voting is Local. Or tell us about what you represent, what your organization is, and why you're here, Deborah.
Yes, ma'am. Hi, I'm Deborah Rose Hinchey, and I am the state director at All Voting is Local. All Voting is a national organization that is also in Pennsylvania, and our goal is to make it as easy and accessible for Americans and Pennsylvanians to vote as possible, and to make sure that every vote is counted and all elections are certified, and that we can make that through a bunch of variety of different voting mechanisms as easy for Pennsylvanians as we can.
Okay. Well, I can tell you, we've had some conversations, and Jeffrey and I have gone back and forth at this. I love mail-in voting. I mean, I
love mail-in voting too.
But Jeffrey had his concerns. He did not think early on, especially, that this was going to work. So, Jeffrey, you want to share what your concerns were?
Well, I always qualified because I myself have voted with absentee ballot in the mail. And that seemed to work fairly fine. My concern is that just in sort of expanding this all over the place, that there are not enough safeguards for it. And no matter what kind of voting we're doing, it doesn't make any difference. There were a couple people, I always use this example, but it's one of all kinds of examples. We have, I don't know what their status is now, but at one point we had a former Democratic congressman from Philadelphia and a judge of elections, a Democratic judge of elections, convicted of voter fraud. And the deal was that that former congressman had employed the judge to stand by voting machines, and when people weren't looking, going ka-ching, 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 and was indicted and sent to prison for voter fraud. I'm not innocent enough to think that that was the first and only time. I think that this kind of thing is a problem in all 50 states, but it certainly has been a problem in our state. And I just would hope that we can continue to do our best, and that when we get to this coming November, we're not going to have these kind of problems again. That's probably a little too optimistic, but you know.
Well, Jeffrey, I hear what you're saying. You're saying that there have been some cases where things didn't go exactly as voters would have hoped as far as, but I will tell you that, and I'll bring Mark in this, that our Secretary of State has gone through pains to assure us that everything is under control and that our voters can have absolute confidence. So, Mark, I don't know if you want to come in here and kind of voice, I think
Sure.
The Democrats want everybody to get out and make it as easy as possible, right?
Yeah, with all due respect to my friend Jeffrey, the fact of the matter is that voting is safe and it's secure in Pennsylvania. It has been for quite some time. I hear that example thrown out there all the time when people want to concoct a reason to instill some fear in voters and say, oh, we've got a problem. No, you don't. You had a corrupt judge and you had a corrupt elected official, and they got caught and they were sent to jail. So the system actually uncovered it and found them. Our occurrences of voter fraud are so minuscule that they literally are almost undetectable in Pennsylvania. I think there were 19 incidences of voter fraud that they uncovered, and half of those were people voting twice for Trump. So we're looking for problems where they don't even exist. So it really, and there's another thing, and we'll get back to Deborah because I want to hear more from her and her organization because, it's not just that people are casting kind of doubt on mail-in voting and the voting process and so on, but there is an active effort underway to undermine voting as we speak. The New York Times did a great report just recently about a whole group of legal eagles who have fanned out all over the country who are trying to change the rules at the local level to empower election officials, for example, to simply not certify if they don't want the result, and to put additional hurdles in front of people so that they have more trouble voting. That is what we need to be guarding against. Voting is safe, but it should be easy and it should be secure, and there should not be an effort to keep people away from the polls.
Well, Deborah, let me bring you in here because I know you have particular concern, I guess, about a certain piece of legislation that's in the right now that's being considered. Tell us about that.
Well, I would love to just respond a little bit. I want to be really clear. All Voting is Local is a nonpartisan organization. We feel really strongly about maintaining a nonpartisan approach because we're on the side of the voters. We're not on the side of any elected official. We're on the side of making sure that every Pennsylvanian can vote. But I do think some really good points were brought up here. I think it's reasonable to have questions around how mail-in balloting functions and the security of your own ballot, because I think that's a real and reasonable thing. People are allowed to ask questions about their ballots and are they secure? But I think it's really, really important that we're very clear when we put forward possible examples of voter fraud. It's really important that we not talk about them in the amorphous and we use specific, clear examples and that we have the data to back them up. Because like the Lieutenant Governor said, the reports of voter fraud in Pennsylvania are minuscule. They're very, very rare. There are very, very small numbers spread over long, long periods of time. And when we do find out about them, it's because our systems are working as intended. We find out about voter fraud or we find out about voting irregularities because our systems work, because the systems of elections in Pennsylvania function well, is how we find out that there are these problems. And I do think bringing up certification is a great idea because it does talk about sort of the systemic attempt, if you can't suppress the vote, the systemic attempt to not certify the vote, which is a really big concern in Pennsylvania and in other states around the country. There does seem to be a pretty concerted push by bad faith actors in the United States to not certify our elections. And certification in Pennsylvania, I just want to be very, very clear, is ministerial. It is not subjective. The counties do not have the right to decide whether to certify or not. That is not something that they are empowered to make a decision. It is their obligation and their statutory obligation to certify the elections no matter what. And so, yeah, so we do have, there is, oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
Do you agree with that, Jeffrey? You don't disagree with that, do you? Or do you have a problem with what she just said?
Do I?
Yeah, I mean, you agree
No.
that. Okay, go ahead.
I mean, the whole point of all of this is we just want safe, certifiable, reliable, honest elections.
Right.
And we have seen examples in the past, and I'm sure there are many more out there that we don't know about over the couple centuries of Pennsylvania history. One that always amuses me when I was studying up on this quite a while ago was an election for governor in, I want to say it was the 1830s. And the incumbent governor was defeated. He was so incensed, he issued an order for what was then the equivalent of what we would now call the Pennsylvania National Guard to surround the Capitol and keep his elected opponent out.
Oh,
and I think he was overruled by the legislature finally, and in he came. So it's not
Well,
like this is some yesterday
no, it
kind of
isn't. But
thing.
let's bring it up to today, because again, what I want to talk about is we now have I actually think I'm one of the weird people who thinks we should be able to vote by internet. I mean, I think I should be able to go on the internet and just do my thing. But Deborah, tell me about the legislation that's there and how it might expand or make it easier or not, or for people to vote.
Yeah, sure. So let's talk about about 18 months ago, the federal Congress passed a law called the Electoral Count Reform Act, and that sets a statutory deadline for certification. That certification deadline is December 11th. Currently working its way through the Pennsylvania state legislature is a bill to bring us into compliance with the Electoral Count Reform Act. There's a really excellent organization called Campaign Legal Center that has been doing this work to bring us into compliance with the Electoral Count Reform Act. And this is a really important piece of legislation because it creates a statutory deadline in Pennsylvania for us to certify our elections. It actually does many things, but one of the most important things is that it does require that we certify by December 11th, which is a very important thing because the new federal law states that all states must certify by December 11th, and that is not negotiable. In Pennsylvania, we do have a history of certifying not at a statutory deadline. We historically don't always have deadlines for certification in Pennsylvania because, like I'd like to remind, before 2020, the act of certifying an election was not a controversial concept. And now we live in a world where the act of certifying an election is a controversial concept. So our Department of State, our counties, our courts were able to certify elections at the pace that was needed to make sure that our elections were free and fair and safe and secure. And now we live in a world where we have to certify by December 11th, and our elections are still safe and secure and free and fair. But because of this need, based on everything that happened in 2020 and the attempts to delegitimize the vote, we do now have to certify by December 11th. And I encourage the state legislature and Pennsylvania residents to really be clear on what the Electoral Count Reform Act is, because it does protect us from bad faith election deniers, and it does to protect us from the big lie.
All right.
Can I jump in and help you with
Go
that?
ahead, Mark, please.
It adds something to what Deborah is saying. The new federal law is not a may certify, it is a shall certify at the federal level and at the local level. But what's happening is that there is a literal army of folks who are out there introducing legislation and doing interviews and so on, suggesting that we can change the rules between now and November 5th so that local election officials can simply choose not to certify. And in fact, since 2020, since this confusion began to creep into our system, there have been 20 different local election officials who have refused to certify in 8 different states. They're not allowed to do that. It's against the law. But the simple act of questioning that is allowing certain individuals to question the whole electoral process. And we've got to stop sowing that kind of doubt in our system.
Well, Jeffrey, I want to bring you in here because honestly, it is a concern if for no reason or for no really valid reason we're causing voters to question or to fear that something isn't right. I mean, I know you care about very much about the elections and all of that, but aren't you concerned that we may be sowing these seeds of doubt for no reason?
No, I don't think so. I think better safe than sorry is my thought. And I am curious as to how many examples of this have happened long before we were around, when you had a Republican machine in Philadelphia, for example, and how and Mark would remember this, the late great Billy Meehan, who ran the Philadelphia Republican Party with an iron fist. I'd be curious to see how all of that worked behind the scenes. I simply don't know. But
Well, I got confession from Deborah that this was not a historic problem for us, that this is crept up
well, we had
late.
Joyce. I'll give you one more example. It made the front page of the New York Times in the day. There was a special election for a state Senate seat in either late 1993 or early 1994. The Democrat supposedly, allegedly won. And the Republican candidate, somebody that I know, and I assume Mark may as well, Bruce Marks, who was a young lawyer and former aide to Arlen Spectator, was the candidate. He had the wit to take all of the returns to a federal judge. And on the front page of the New York Times in 1994, it says that a federal judge has overruled the election results and yanked the Democrat out of the state Senate, and said, these are his words, not mine, there had been a, quote, massive scheme by Democrats to steal the election, and he overturned it. Now that's, a good while ago, but still, I think, if there's smoke, there's fire somewhere here. And and it's not just Pennsylvania. I mean, I want to be fair to our beloved Commonwealth. I do think that the state that produced the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution can probably do better.
Well, Mark, I know you want to chime in on that one. Go ahead.
Too. Jeffrey, I'm smiling here because I know the Bruce Marks and Stinson race intimately because it affected me personally.
Wow.
You may not know this, but I was the lieutenant governor at the time, and I was a candidate running for governor at that time.
Right.
And I had the authority to schedule a special election. What the courts actually said was that we're going to vacate this, that we're going to think this through because there was identifiable corruption on both sides, right? So Stinson, who had presented himself to the Senate, right, was now being told by the court, stand down, because we want some time to figure out who actually won this race, okay? The reason it affected me was because I was approached by the Democratic leadership and told, send the writ of new election. Let's schedule a new election. Let's just elect him again because we now know we have the votes and, we can go through this again because the courts have said that you have the power to do that. So that's not what the court said. The court said there may have been some corruption on both sides. So we need to take a look at this and make a judicial decision about how to proceed. I refused to send that writ, and I lost a lot of Democratic support as a result of it. But my point is that those kinds of incidents really are few and far between. And even if they hit the New York Times, we fix them. Even in the era of big organizations like Billy Meehan in Philadelphia and John Torquato in Cambria County, you can't get away with it. The election laws are very, very tight, and woe to you if you get your fingers in that mess, because you will go to jail for a long time, and that's the way it should be.
Well, Deborah, I'm going to bring you in here too, because you've heard these two different points of view. Let's hear from you. Where do you stand with your organization? And is Pennsylvania any more problematic than any other state, since you're a nationwide organization?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that we have to be really, really conscious of when we're talking about these incidents is that we're reporting the facts correctly and that we're not using an individual incident to draw a comparison or create a pattern of behavior that doesn't actually exist, because that becomes fuel for mis and disinformation, which is one of the biggest actors at play in the 2024 election, is the misinformation and disinformation about how our elections function. And so when we bring forth examples of possible voter fraud or possible election interference, We have to be very, very clear on the details. And we have to be very, very clear on what is fact and what is fiction, or else we become the gasoline in the tank for mis and disinformation. No, I don't think Pennsylvania is better or worse than any other state, but I believe that Pennsylvania elections, like Georgia elections, like Michigan elections, like Arizona elections, are free and fair. I believe that those voters are freely and fairly casting their ballots, and those ballots are being rightly counted, and those elections are being certified. I don't believe that Pennsylvania is better or worse, because I believe in Pennsylvania, Arizona, Michigan, there are devoted election officials who are making sure that our votes are being counted quickly and fairly. And I think one of the big actors in this fight about whether our elections are free and fair or safe and secure are our elections officials, are the people who are counting our ballots every day. Because when we target the election system and we spread mis and disinformation about the election system, we make them unsafe. We create a dynamic where those people are unsafe. We've had so many election officials in Pennsylvania resign due to death threats since 2020. The number of elections officials that are resigning and being replaced by less experienced folks is a wild number. And so we just have to be really, really clear what the stakes of talking about and being and spreading information about how secure our election systems are, because there are real consequences. And those consequences are the death threats that usually members of their own party are receiving in regards to the fact that they might be.
Deborah, that's a hugely important point you've made, because I remember being at the press club luncheon only a few months ago, where our Secretary of State Al Schmidt came and quite emotionally, first of all, talked about the death threats and the threats him and his family have personally received. But he also talked about the threats that are coming to election officials based on what he says is simply hyped up lies. And I'm putting it out there because, as you pointed out, lives are at stake. People, good people, including Republicans and Democrats, who are manning these or peopling these positions. You know, they deserve our respect and our support. I mean, Jeffrey, I know you believe that there may be issues, but aren't you at all concerned about the safety of the people who are out there and who are
Well, sure,
they're
sure, Joyce.
doing the best they can?
Sure, of course, Joyce. But I mean, I have to say, and this is a sad commentary on human life and political life, I don't care what you're doing in American political life, because you are out there in the public spotlight, you can often enough draw the ire of some nut out there who's going to send along a threat. I mean, this kind of thing happens, I think it's sad to say, with some regularity. It goes issue by issue by issue. You know, nothing can happen for quite a long time, and then all of a sudden X is in the headlines every day, and that's the problem.
Yeah, I think what they're suggesting is that fueling those fires is what they're concerned about, egging on those people who may, you know, who may be impressionable, so to speak, and you're basically encouraging some of this behavior is what people fear. I mean, I don't know, Deborah, what's the status of the legislation that I know you wanted to talk about and wanted people to be aware of?
Yeah, so it passed the State House actually in June, and it goes before the Senate State Government Committee in when session comes back in September. And the Senate will have to decide to take it up. We really hope that the Senate does decide to take it up. But it remains to be seen whether the Senate State Government Committee and Senator Dush will be willing to take that legislation up.
And this is not bipartisan. This is a partisan issue. Democrats on one side and Republicans on the other, or is it bipartisan support?
No, ma'am. It is bipartisan support.
Okay.
It passed the House with bipartisan support.
All right. So we might have some common ground here. Mark, I see you wanted to add something.
I don't know about that. I think there were a few Republican votes, but not a whole lot.
Oh, yes, yes, sir. Not a whole lot, but they did have some Republican votes.
And therein lies the problem, because when this bill is reported out by the Senate State Government Committee, I guarantee you that somebody is going to stand up and offer an amendment and try to insert language that gives local clerks additional powers and perhaps the power not to certify. It's crazy and it's illegal, but I think that's the nature of the discourse that we're having. And I think that those are the marching orders that some of them are going to feel obligated to put into the legislation. So I assume you're going to be guarding against that kind of nonsense.
Yeah, I think that another thing that we see in the legislature when it comes to election reform bills is that both parties have the things that they absolutely want to have happen in our election systems. And so any attempts to reform the process and reform the election code are typically like the lieutenant governor said, somebody introduces an amendment that adds something that is a complete non-negotiable for the other side. And so any attempt to reform the election code just like doesn't stand to muster, because there are just, both parties have these very large things that they both will put into any elections bill, and the other side is completely unwilling to compromise on it, which I think is like a general theme in Harrisburg is there not a lot happens because folks aren't willing to come to the table.
Right.
Wow. Well, that I'm going to tell you, I normally like to leave on an upbeat to say something
Oh.
great but this really scares me, and I think it should scare a lot of voters.
Well,
Yes,
Joyce,
sir.
I'll leave you on an upbeat note.
Okay.
We've got an election in 2 months, and maybe I should consider writing in Mark's name.
Well, we could do a
Maybe
whole
so.
lot worse. We could do a whole lot worse. But honestly, I do think it would be great if we would. I mean, I certainly, having done some research and having listened to the Secretary of State, express how concerned he was, first of all, about the safety, but how absolutely confident he is that these are good people who want to protect American democracy and are doing their darndest to make sure that everything goes according to the law, right? And everything, people can have confidence in their election. And I just think it would be great if people, leaders from both parties, supported that kind of statement. Unless they see something clearly otherwise, support our democracy, support the good people who are out there. Nothing is ever going to be perfect, right? You're always going to have something. But by and large, what I'm hearing, Jeffrey, and I'm correct, is that we've got a sound system with good people behind it.
See,
Well,
and you said you wouldn't end on a positive note. That was very
All right. Well, good. I think we all are in agreement with that. And once again, I want to thank Deborah Rose Hinchey for joining us to explain just what's going on so that we can be aware. Deborah, is there anything our viewers and our readers can do to try to help the boy? Are you encouraging them to write to their legislator? I mean, what can we do if we're worried about this?
Yeah, I would love to. So there's a few things that are really, really helpful that people can do. First of all, it is to remember to please vote at in whatever mechanism you have available to you. All counties have fully available mail-in balloting. Some counties have early voting or have satellite elections offices where you can go and vote by mail in person. So please vote at whatever pace and whatever makes it easiest for you to vote. But if you're interested in making sure that your county is doing the most that they can to support voters, please call their county and ask if they have notice and cure. Notice and cure is the act of if somebody makes a mistake on their mail-in ballot. In many, many counties in Pennsylvania, they are not allowed to correct that mistake, and they lose their opportunity to vote if they make a mistake on their mail-in ballot. There are many counties that do allow notice and cure, but there are counties that don't. And if you are willing to call, please call your county. And if they do not have notice and cure, please ask them to have notice and cure and explain how many more voters can be enfranchised if county elections officials are notifying voters that there's a mistake on their ballot and allowing them to fix that mistake ahead of election day.
And frankly, that also should be bipartisan because a Republican, as
Yes,
well as a
ma'am.
Democrat, could make a mistake on their ballot and want to correct it, right? Everybody should be on board with that.
Yes,
Yeah.
ma'am. Thousands of voters every year are disenfranchised. And I want to be clear, that number is far lower every year. Every year, voters get better and better at making sure there's not mistakes on their ballot. We are miles ahead of where we were in 2020. But every year, there are still thousands of people whose votes don't get counted because their counties don't notify them that there's mistakes on their ballots, or they notify them, but they are not allowed to correct them.
Wow. Wow. Well, there's a campaign we can all get behind. Let's make sure everybody has the vote. And if they make a mistake, give them a chance to fix it, please. With that, I want to thank former Lieutenant Governor Mark Singel, for being here with us, gracing us with his wisdom and his time. Jeffrey, as always, we're delighted to have you here sharing your historical perspective. And Deborah, we hope to have you back to talk about the success of your efforts very soon. So with that, I thank everyone for joining us, and we will see you here next week again on Battleground PA. See you later, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
See you later.